Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for the nice feedback and the comments from your previous from my previous videos. I did a video on Green Fire and Athabasca Sandstone asset. Today, I'm going to be talking about what's been taking place in August for increased production at Suncor's Firebag asset. So, as you saw, the production is increased significantly. But this is not something that hasn't happened before. But if you kind of follow the sector and you aware of what's been going on when it comes to oil production and curtailment and fires and all that, you should really care about what's going on at Suncor right now with Firebag, and where production in the previous month, production in basically July. So today we're in end of September, reporting August production, but production at the end of July for that month was reported to be 180,450 barrels a day. And today, that production increased to 239,689 barrels per day. And I will explain how basically the dynamics behind that. The increase here is about 32.82%, so 32% increase on monthly basis. But as you can see from the chart that I'm sharing here, this been observed before through the various events that been taking place. What happened actually in July was production was curtailed due to wildfire that burned next to the Suncor's Firebag oil sands asset. There was a lot of communication about that. Some staff was evacuated from Firebag asset, and then they had to curtail some production, just really kind of mitigate the fire situation. But as we're looking at this chart that I'm sharing here, you see a schematic performance well production history for Firebag, which basically kind of came online in 2003. So it's about 21 years now. It's been around, and you can see the various events that have been taking place over the years when it comes to basically the outages and planned turnarounds and the Fort McMurray wildfires, like here back in kind of the 2015 towards 2016 timeframe, where you saw a significant drop in steam injection, going from basically that 90,000 barrels a day injection of cubes per day injection of steam here, and basically dropping significantly all the way down. You've seen that in planned turnaround events, where like this one here, and you've seen this here, and you've seen that here. So this is basically nothing abnormal when it comes to dropping steam, and the associated basically oil production is also declining, right? So you have a drop here, you have a drop here. This drop, the initial drop I showed, is due to the Fort McMurray wildfires back in 2015 going towards 2016, and the oil production here and here, here and here is basically kind of a routine drop that you can see in every SAGD asset when it comes to planned turnaround and maintenance that's required to basically sustain the asset and kind of keep the integrity of the facilities on site. So in their upcoming communications, when we see an update for this graph in the next year, you will see another one of those. So Fort McMurray wildfire event in 2024, and you will know why, because you heard about this here and it's communicated by the company. So a couple of things here that I really wanted kind of to provide an update. So basically, as I mentioned, current production right now is record production for Firebag. So it's about 239,000 barrels per day. So 239,609 that I basically calculated from the data from comes from the public domain. And yeah, so, and this is very close to the Christina Lake production rate, which I think Christina Lake Cenovus right now is 241. So if you kind of following the Christina Lake asset, which is an amazing asset with amazing SOR, Firebag is not far behind, so it's kind of getting there. On that scale here, you can see basically, if we're looking at oil production rate, you can see that 40,000 cubes, right? The unit is cubes per day. That's about 252,000 barrels a day. So we're not quite there yet, but they got to that 239,000, which is very close to Christina Lake, as I mentioned just now. So this is my update. The previous month production, due to the curtailment that's going to be reported in Q3, as I mentioned, was 180,450, and the increase on month-over-month basis from July to August is 32.82%. And now we're at 239,689 barrels per day. Now, by the way, if you're listening to this and I sound a little bit slow to you, click on the right side on YouTube. There's like a three dots thing, and you can pick a speed selection and basically have me talking much faster. And this could be more interesting for you, because very often I would kind of do it when I watch podcasts and other people communicate. So what I want to do right now, I want to provide a little bit more update about the asset, do a deeper dive into kind of the technical mechanisms of the curtailment, what happens kind of mechanically, from a technical perspective, when the company curtails production at the wellbore level. Talk a little bit about dynamic storage, kind of the shut-in strategy. Talk a little bit about density, and really provide an update on the asset when it comes to their wells and the average production and such. So I'll just do it quickly. As I mentioned, the increase is due to forest fires that's been taking place. Management communicated that they're going to be reporting this data in Q3. So we saw SAGD shut-in basically that's been taking place on some wells. And then what we're seeing now is essentially a flush production. And what I mean by flush production, if you look in the previous charts, and by the way, I made a bet about, I think it was about a year ago with a gentleman. Meg Energy had a turnaround. So just like here, right, you have a turnaround, which SAGD asset has a turnaround every time. And production basically dropped just like it dropped here and here. And planned turnaround production dropped significantly like it dropped here. In this case, it dropped by over 100,000 barrels a day. And so the bet I made with him is that, hey, production actually is going to not only come back to previous levels, but it's going to be even higher, like at all-time high, just like what you saw here in the time frame here for Suncor. So we made this bet over like a steak, which was extremely tasty. I really enjoyed that steak. But really, what dynamically happened here, and what the gentleman didn't understand very well, is that when you have essentially a steam chamber that's developing and growing, right? So if you have a producer, so this is the technology they use, steam assisted gravity drainage. So you have a producer well, you have injector well, you have basically development of the steam chamber that's growing. The steam is being injected through the injector well right here, and then the oil in green here is draining downwards by gravity, right? So it's draining downwards towards the production well. And what ends up happening is that when you do a shut-in on the injector, you basically accumulate the liquid level on top of the producer, right? So when you open, basically, when you increase the pump speed, let's say if it's, I don't know, if it's like ESP, electric submersible pump it over 60 hertz, then you could flush that production. And that's kind of what you see here, at least in the Suncor example. You can see those flushes that's coming in. You see a shut-in right here, and you see a flush. You see a shut-in and you see a flush. You see a shut-in and you see a flush. Shut-in, flush, shut-in, flush. So you start getting the idea here, shut-in, flush. You start getting the idea that this is a very normal kind of event that's taking place in SAGD, and that's kind of the mechanism behind why it's taking place. So very often, if the management team communicates that there is a fire outage or something like that, one should expect the following month, basically, the production to be picking up with kind of historic levels, but also perhaps even flushing. So what they've been reporting basically in the previous months before that is the production was, for example, for June was about 233 thousand barrels a day, and prior to that it was 235, 230, 229. So and then they drop it to 180, and you start getting the idea that basically that level that we are talking about right here for that specific production rate here is flashing, right? And then maybe we're getting kind of restored back to the normal levels, which I would say is about, I don't know, mid to 30s. So as always, Firebag was slightly behind Christina Lake, but you can see there was significant kind of production increase here between 2011 to 2015, as FIREBAG was bringing stage 3 and stage 4 online for their asset, right? So the production in ability to generate the steam and basically increase the steam injection, and then you kind of plateau at that rate here, was able to provide with the traditional oil. And as I mentioned in my previous videos, the SOR, so steam to oil ratio, is a key metric in evaluating the efficiency of that steam allocation, where you kind of increase that steam injection rate and you have a follow through on oil production. And that SOR is really important. FIREBAG monthly SOR is really good, actually. It's about 2.543 that was calculated by me. And yeah, that's great. So we're currently at 2.53 on the monthly. So SOR equals 2.543. So you start kind of getting the observation here is that if oil rate right now is about 239,000, so you need to multiply by 2.543 to get the steam rate. And that steam rate, the current steam injection rate that's being seen at Suncor, is about 609,705 barrels per day, so with a SOR of 2.53. So a couple more updates here about basically what Suncor is seeing, and then I will talk a little bit more about how do you know how much oil could be stored through that kind of dynamic storage when it comes to that producer, right? Like what those numbers actually look like. So kind of quick update here on the overall number of producing wells that I calculated were 326 wells. So they have 326 wells in FIREBAG, where the average well is producing 735 barrels per day, which is extremely healthy. Now, as they were producing, basically increasing production on those wells that were kind of storing some of that bitumen, as you kind of flush that production, the one of the best performing wells was 3,551 barrels per day producer, and the numbers that produce above the average of 735 were 128, and the number of the wells that produce below were 198. And as a reminder, the overall number of producing wells were 326. So the top 128 wells above the normal average should produce about 65% of the overall production rate at FIREBAG SAGD asset, and the top 5 wells produce about 6% of the overall production rate. So you kind of start getting the idea that they have a really good kind of allocation between the various wells, that if they shut in some of the wells, they can produce from others, or if there is a fire from kind of one side of the asset, you can still get very healthy production from other side of the asset. So as mentioned, the steam injection rate was 609,705 from about 345 SAGD injectors. So 345 SAGD injectors, you have about 326 SAGD producers with SOR of 2.543. Now, when they inject the steam, that steam heat transfers to the oil to make it less viscous, to get it mobile so it can be drained by gravity. And that water produced to steam ratio at FIREBAG is about 1.088, which is amazing because ideally you want to have an SOR of 1. That tells me that FIREBAG Suncor is doing a really good job when it comes to water oil material balance, really kind of mitigating complex geologies that could kind of result in increased kind of water production rate, and really trying to allocate that steam appropriately to produce the right amount of oil, and that kind of being supported nicely by the 2.543 SOR on the monthlies for the asset. So the ratio, I calculate the ratio of the water produced compared to the overall volume of total liquids that produce at Suncor FIREBAG, and this is commonly known as the water cut. So the water cut right now is on the monthlies is 73.46. I think at Christina Lake, Cenovus, the water cut was just under 70, so it was about 69, which is really, really good, right? So you start getting the idea that FIREBAG and Suncor Christina Lake, the top tier assets in Alberta. And when it comes to like the actual volumes for what we're talking about, so this is like 239, let's say 240,000 barrels per day. So Nova Christina Lake is another 240. So between those two assets is like 480,000 barrels a day, right? That's like close to 0.5% of world's oil demand between those two assets. And since the previously reported data, the production increased in about 80% of the oil producing wells, which makes a lot of sense because in July, a lot of the curtailment was taking place. So a lot of the wells were impacted. And that's you would expect to see 80% in 80% of the wells increase in oil production, which is why they have record production in the SAGD FIREBAG Suncor asset. And when it comes to looking at the producing wells, how many producing wells failed due to the curtailment? Well, they actually added another well, so it seems like they kind of drill or drill the well. So there wasn't really an impact on that, which leads us to the next topic, and I think it's really important topic to talk about is how dynamically this thing takes place and what does it look like? What's that kind of dynamic storage when it comes to curtailment, and why production is able to be restored just like what you see here. So when you have the shut-in, why is the production kind of flushing that way? So as I mentioned, you basically have steam chamber. So SAGD, you have injector producer, and you have steam chamber development. So this is a small steam chamber. It could get bigger over time as you inject steam and drain that oil by gravity, or you can have a big chamber. So let's assume right now it's been, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, and we have an injector, and we have a producer, and we essentially maybe reach the overburden when it comes to chamber development. So we have like a triangular type of shape, right? Now, this is kind of more of a 3D exercise because all the swells, they're very long, but they're kind of a little bit shorter on kind of the X and Y axis. X and Z axis, but very long in the Y axis. So if you think about this, this is kind of the X axis. This is height will be the z-axis, and the length will be maybe the y-axis. So hopefully, I don't make it too confusing. So I don't necessarily know what's the average length for the um, for the well bores, but I would assume, let's say it's 800 meters, right? So 800 meters. So those will be very long, and let's assume that. The x-axis here, so between maybe like injector producer here, but at the top, at the triangle, because we're trying to really calculate the volume of that kind of system where the liquid level could be stored. So let's kind of maybe draw it here in a different color. So right here, so we're trying to calculate that volume of that liquid that could be stored during the shut-ins. So what does that volume looks like? What's that calculation that could be taking place? So the height here, I would assume maybe 20 meters. So everything here is meters. So 100 meters here, 20 meters here, 800 meters here. But remember that the liquid level is located kind of between injector and producer. So even if we have the pay of 20 meters, we have to kind of assume that this is 5-meter pay here. So between injector and producer. And let's just calculate for the 1 meter of the liquid level. So keep it simple. Say, okay, if we have 1 meter of the liquid level, what does that look like? So obviously the volume for a triangular calculation when it comes to the volume, if you look at kind of the prism's volume, if you will, so the area of the triangle for prism's volume that I drew here, this will be width times height times depth divided by 2. And what we could conclude from here is that if we take the 800 meters in z direction, 1 meter in vertical direction, you can always use the 20 meters for if you want to evaluate the overall volume for the reservoir. But right now we're just trying to understand the liquid level, and times 100 meters, and we divide that by 2, we get about 40,000. So we get about 40,000 cubes of volume. But remember that we have to consider kind of porosity at that level and really the oil saturation that's coming. So the oil saturation is about for firebags. So for Suncor, the oil saturation is about 75%, and the porosity is about 0.322. And again, if I'm too slow and it's kind of boring at this point, just put me on speed and you can kind of watch this video really quickly. That's what I would have done. So if you have 40,000 cubes, oh, and another important parameter that's very important to consider here is that the water cut that's coming back that I calculate is about 73.46. So now the question is, when we have that liquid level, what's exactly in this liquid? Like what's exactly in there? Because that emulsion has water and it has oil in there, but what's that partitioning? Is it like 50-50? Because usually the bitumen that in that place and the water, they have very similar densities. So the partitioning of the densities takes time over a longer period of time when you close to 1,000 kilos per cube, right? So in this case, you do have minimal partitioning. So now we have to kind of decide, well, are we more on the water cut side, right? So are we more on that 73 part? Um, or are we in the oil saturation phase where this needs to be drained? But because the steam chamber was already developed for a longer period of time, so the steam chamber here was developed for a longer period of time, we can assume that maybe it's towards kind of more of the kind of water cut drainage versus the oil. So we can maybe assume that maybe 30% of the oil is, of the emulsion is oil. So in that case, I take that 40,000 cubes, I'll multiply this by 0.3322 to account for the porosity and 0.3 to account for um, basically the oil that's being produced within the emulsion. I will convert it to barrels right now, and the number I get is about 24,300 barrels. So the number I get is, so let's kind of erase. Oh, okay, I'll write it here. So 24,300 barrels. But if I produce 1,000 barrels a day, so the average production, let's say, is about 730 to 750. But let's assume for simplicity, I produce 1,000 barrels a day, and we have 24,300 barrels of storage here in that 1 meter space. Well, what we're getting is basically we're getting about 24 days of storage for that 1 meter that bitumen could be stored. And now we're starting to get the idea that, and obviously it's a very simplistic calculation to really communicate how this works, but you could have a storage of 2 meters maybe of that liquid level. If there is like a fire and you need to be storing that for longer, you can have a 3 meter, which basically creates a multiple for the 24 days, right? You can store for maybe 48 days or 60 days or 70 days. So that's kind of the concept of the dynamic storage. And what's really important here is that this type of tools, they give assets like Suncor FIREBAG an opportunity to really curtail production in those type of events. This is not something that may be typical for conventional sites, but this is very kind of routine, once in a while situation where you can do on SAGD like assets, right? So on SAGD assets. And as mentioned before, this is something that's been done here through the flash production and here as well during the wildfires, during turnarounds, and pretty much in all of those other events where you can actually store that production. This also happens in smaller levels, right? Where you can have the production here when before kind of 2010, when FIREBAG was really ramping up its kind of operations as function of that steam capabilities, right? So this is kind of really important to be mindful of. So this is really the dynamics of dynamic storage, of shutting in, increasing. That's why I got my free stake based on the bet I made that the production will be flushing, and that kind of subcool will be able to kind of be produced, right? But again, we made a lot of assumptions, some key core assumptions where basically what's that oil saturation, what's the water cut, um, what's that kind of porosity, dynamic porosity that's been taking place, even though it's fairly static at about 0.32 for that assets. And obviously we speculated on the form of on the shape of the chamber. Obviously, if you have injector producer like this and you have a smaller chamber, that's very different if you have a much bigger chamber that's been growing for 10 years. And so that triangular kind of prism volume that I calculated could be very different versus that volume. So the engineers for these companies, they're very good at kind of understanding how to what to shut in or what to maybe trickle when it comes to production, and how to allocate that steam. A couple more thoughts. I see I'm almost kind of at this half-hour mark, but I'll spend a couple minutes maybe going over some of the parameters on this chart. Hopefully, this kind of stuff adds value to the listeners, and let me know in the comments if you get value from that. So from Firebag, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest sites right now that produce most amount of oil in the Canadian oil sands in situ production. You've seen significant ramp up in operations here from basically 2010 towards 2015. Too bad the Saudis flood the market with oil in 2016, and you can see Suncor did a really good job sustaining that production oil rate over these years and kind of being low cost of supply in a sense, um, where WTI prices were very horrible. The WCS was like, I don't know, at like 30, $35. And regardless, the company did okay, and sustained production, provided kind of that energy security. And you can even see here a really interesting event that I think it's really important to point out: start of government issue curtailment that was taking place. That's another topic we could kind of spend some time talking about. But they basically curtailed some of the production here because the prices of oil prices, like in dollars, were just too low, right? And it was very challenging time for our sector. Now you can start seeing also that steam that's being injected here, it's fairly steady. You can see here basically the kind of ramp up steam operations. The water produced, that's in blue. The water rate that you see, uh, really it should be about one. The one I calculated is about 0.088, which is very healthy, right? So they're doing a good job. And you can see historically it's been kind of tracking the steam volumes essentially. So, which makes sense. So the water you inject, you want to produce back, and you want to recycle it, and you want to re-inject it, right? So in a closed kind of loop system, and that's precisely what's happening here. So they're doing a really good job maintaining that. Now, as the pads mature over time, as the steam chambers coalesce, that volume, right? It's becoming significantly big, and so you need some kind of technology and for my students that's coming in January, if you're watching this is the NCG co-injection, right? So NCG injection rates, you can see here basically they're really ramping up the operation of steam injection of NCG injection rates, going like peaking at about E3M3, so 250 E3M3 per day. We call it DEX, so 250 DEX a day on the gas injection rate for the entire asset. And basically as the pressure, as the reservoirs able to maybe reduce a little bit steam here and reallocate that steam, they basically ramp it down. So which is interesting. It's kind of very unique to most of the assets that I'm following, where there's this kind of ramp up in NCG injection, and then they basically slow down on that, where current injection for at least for 2022 is about 100 decks a day. And I'm looking forward providing an update on what the production rate injection rate for NCG injection rate looks like today in September 2024, when I'm doing this video. But hopefully this was valuable to understand kind of what Suncor is up to. The record production right now at Firebag, as mentioned, they're producing 239,689 239,689 barrels per day. So that's record production for Suncor Firebag asset. And the production during the curtailment was 180,450. And we're going to be seeing the production rates for September. And as you know, this is basically Q3, so this will be reported in a month or so. So for September, there'll be reported production. They'll report Q3 with the economics, and then October, November, December, we're going to be Q4. And as I mentioned, historically, the production been about 233 to 31, so kind of mid 230s. So here they basically, almost at 240. So really nice achievement. Water cut 73%, SOR 2.5, water produced to steam ratio about 1.08. Um, the asset looking really really good. So congrats to the company that was able basically to deal with difficult situation when it comes to um, fires that we've been seeing, curtailing production, doing things safely with no harm to people. and restoring production at record rates. So good job, Suncor. So that was my update for Firebag. Give me a like in the comments, please. Provide in the any suggestions on what kind of videos you want to see. But as you start kind of getting the idea, I'm a fairly technical guy, and I provide basically a lot of kind of insights towards how these companies are functioning and on the how the oil is being produced essentially in some of those assets. So thank you so much for listening to me. All the best. Thank you.